All right. So, hi everyone. Welcome. This is another immigration webinar with Bashyam Shaw LLP. I am Haley Pickard. I'm the Director of Client Relations and Development. I have with me today Murali Bashyam, Managing Partner, and Allison Lukanich, an attorney with our firm. So, with today's immigration webinar, we're going to talk about just what to remember when traveling internationally. We are going into the holidays. So a lot of people take this time to travel and visit family. So we just want to touch base about quick reminders to remember, what to remember when traveling, what to take with you, both for the business immigration and family immigration side. So Murali and Allison, welcome.
Thanks, Haley.
So, by the way, Allison, you actually were able to travel outside of the planet, right? How did you do that?
Yes, I set this up just for today to have a little bit of fun. So here I am reporting from whatever that latest space shuttle that just launched last week. I should be a little more up on things like that. Yeah. From the International Space Station, here I am.
Yeah.
Fantastic. No visa issues there, right, Allison?
No, thankfully no.
All right.
Okay, so first off, let's just kind of go over it. Should people be traveling at all, internationally? Is it, just to kind of get that out of the way before we get started?
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is if you don't have to travel, certainly don't. And that's because the COVID situation has obviously caused havoc around the world with regard to flights, visa issuance with consulate closures and everything else. It's not worth taking that chance right now. But we do encounter a lot of folks who have emergencies, parents or family members who, are in the hospital or have health issues and things like that. And in those situations, obviously, no immigration attorney can sit here and say, don't travel because of that. You got to do what you have to do as a person. But talk to your immigration attorney, for sure, because every situation is different. And, the attorney can help guide you on what the options are and what could be the potential consequences of your travel so that you can inform your, employer here or family members on what may or may not happen. So if you're going to travel with caution, with information. But if you don't have to travel, I'd say don't do it. Allison?
Yeah, and I think just adding on to that, being flexible is the most important. You might have, I want to be out of the country these 10 days and these are the dates I'm traveling, but countries are shutting down, flights are getting canceled, rerouted, moved around, and with little to no notice to anyone. So if you do need to travel, although we don't advise it, you're going to need to be flexible. The flights you book may not be the flight or even the airline you end up on, and you're just going to have to roll with the punches. There may be quarantining, testing requirements in place by the airlines, the airports, the countries. So flexibility will be really important.
Yeah, and to expand on what you're saying, Allison, we've seen a lot of situations where people are booking visa appointments, but those visa appointments are being booked like in February or March or something, and they're being canceled too, So if you book a visa appointment and you go, back to that country, while traveling, you have to be prepared to actually, if they cancel that visa appointment, you might be stuck there for a while, So that information, I think people don't really have as much, that these things are constantly changing and they need to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, specifically for kind of how COVID is affecting travel, is that even though visa appointments are being scheduled, it's still kind of a very dynamic, changing situation. So we don't know, even though it has been scheduled for, say February, if they will still be able to have that visa appointment. So I think that's very key for immigrants and non-immigrants to keep in mind if they intend to travel internationally.
Yeah, if you need a visa appointment, be careful. Talk to the attorney first.
Yeah, for sure. So Murali, starting off, what should those on the business side take with them if traveling internationally?
If they're traveling internationally, of course, it depends on the country. I mean, every country is different in how they're dealing with this right now. But in general, if you have a visa already in your passport, we're not recommending that you don't travel. And the regular COVID-related risks, on that, make sure to take a employment confirmation letter, your most recent pay stubs, a copy of your petition, because if you already have a visa stamp that's unexpired, when you come back at the port of entry, you want to be prepared to provide these documents in case they ask for it. But what we're seeing right now is that people are traveling, those who have a visa stamp and everything else. I mean, they are going back and forth between certain countries. Of course, different countries have quarantine rules and different countries have, travel bans, like the Schengen countries, for example, with the US and even Canada, but for example, India does not have an official travel ban with the US. So people are traveling back and forth depending on flight availability, which seems to be available right now. So yeah, I mean, just take those documents if you already have a visa stamp. If you don't have a visa stamp, listen to what we were saying earlier in this webinar.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Allison, for those who are traveling on advanced parole, and tell me if I'm missing anything else. And I know specifically advanced parole, kind of what should people take with them if they're planning to travel internationally?
Well, you need your advanced parole documents, whether that's a combo card or the actual 512L paperwork, depending on how you applied for and were approved for it. And of course, you should always bring proof of your underlying status. If you're a pending adjustment applicant, receipt notice, or if you have TPS, DACA, or some other status that allows you to travel on advanced parole, just bring that with you.
Okay. So I know we get this question a lot. How does this differ, for those who may be on immigrant, non-immigrant status, traveling internationally versus traveling nationally? So say they want to go visit family who happens to be in California if they live in North Carolina. So is there anything specifically they need to take with them, kind of like we were talking about the visa stamps, or is it a little bit different for if they're traveling nationally?
Well, I think it depends where they're traveling. CBP has heightened presence on border states and states. If you're flying into a big international airport, depending on your status, you should bring proof of that. CBP has the right to question your immigration status within 100 miles of the border, which is basically any major international airport on the East or West Coast. But the biggest issue about domestic travel, as well as international travel, Google the travel restrictions of where you're going. I was actually recently looking up just my own interest. I mean, the entire Northeast, all New England states are completely shut down to even a North Carolina person wants to go to Vermont for the holidays. You're not going unless you can quarantine for 2 weeks. So it's not just, oh, well, I'm inside the United States, I can go wherever I want. Well, COVID rules are a little bit different. So if you are traveling to visit family domestically, same as you're going internationally, inform yourself, figure out what travel restrictions, if you have to test before you get on the plane, test within so many days. I believe Massachusetts actually has a $500 penalty per day that you either don't quarantine or report back negative test results when you're there. So a lot of states are somewhat locked down to even domestic travel right now.
I mean, that's a great point, Allison. I mean, even going to like the Bahamas or Cayman Islands or all these islands, they require a COVID test when you get to the airport. And of course, that's outside of the immigration context that we're talking about now, but it's still related to travel. Yeah, you're right. I mean, simply just Google it, make sure you're informed, number one, and make the right decision so that you're not stuck somewhere.
Or you're not stuck quarantining for 2 weeks.
Correct. Yeah.
And I would say, Google it before you book any plans, but also the day before. These states are constantly changing. Our COVID numbers are going up. Even, was it Friday or over the weekend, Roy Cooper put in a bunch of new restrictions for North Carolina, mask mandates. So you just have to keep informing yourself what is true today if you're planning to travel around Christmas. What is true today in the state you want to go or the country you want to go will not be true 4 weeks from now at Christmas time.
Yeah, that's a good point to keep in mind. So Murali, I know we touched on this a little bit, but if a foreign professional worker is intending to travel now, what should they tell their employer from an expectation standpoint?
Well, it depends whether that foreign professional worker has a visa stamp or not, you know. And if the foreign professional worker has a visa stamp that's unexpired and they've been maintaining their status, and there's no issues with their immigration situation, they should be fine to travel as long as they're not, going to a place with a travel ban. Again, as Allison mentioned, I mean, we have to look at all of these things, But let's just take India for an example. I mean, they should be able to travel to India and come back. There's no travel ban with India, If you're Chinese, you should be able to travel to China, but you might not be able to come back, And so you have to look at each country separately and just make sure you know exactly what those rules are right now. But if you don't have a visa stamp, and let's say that you want to take that chance because you have a family emergency and you want to make an appointment at the consulate whenever the Trump executive orders have expired and the visas, consulates are open again for visa stamping. I think that those employees have to tell their employers that everything is in flux. Just because they have a appointment in February, March, April, or whatever, doesn't mean that that's going to happen. And there's a lot of pent-up demand right now. I mean, there are a lot of people who are stuck outside the U.S. Waiting to get a visa stamp to come back in. I mean, think about the H-1B cap. All the folks who are outside the U.S. already for the H-1B cap are waiting, to come back in or to come in for the first time. The expectation should be, we don't know, and if the employer says we can't wait, then the employee should take that into strong consideration when making a decision, right? And we certainly don't want to say that, family is less important than employment. It's not, but you have to weigh these things as an individual and say, all right, if the employer is flexible, great, take that chance. If the employer is not flexible, then you've got to make that personal decision on your own.
Okay. So if people are able to re-enter the U.S., what should they expect at their port of entry? I know it can differ based on where they're entering from, be it, by car or by airplane, but kind of what should they expect at the port of entry?
The same as always. I mean, my understanding is we are not COVID screening at the airports. We're not really doing temperature checks or anything, which I think is a huge reason you should not consider international travel, right? The US doesn't really seem to care. So aside from, going through regular inspection, being admitted, checking visa status, that's pretty much my understanding of what there is to expect right now.
Yeah, and I agree with that. In the clients that, I speak with on a daily basis, it doesn't seem like the port of entry is all that different than it was before. They might ask you a question about how do you feel, what you've been doing, and types of things, but I don't think it's that different. And I would just say, just make sure you have the right documentation with you, which Haley, you asked us about earlier in this Facebook Live, and other than that, don't overthink it. Just answer the questions honestly, with confidence, and just be careful, just that's, I would say that's the biggest thing we can recommend if you're going to travel right now. And this is not immigration advice, but just be careful.
Yeah. I think also just something we reiterate with our clients is that once you do re-enter, especially if you are on some type of non-immigrant visa, make sure to check your online I-94, just to make sure that it matches what is reflected in your visa stamp, and so that you don't accidentally go out of status. So,
and Haley, to that point, we've seen that a lot, or sometimes at the port of entry, they'll give you the I-94 until the visa expiration date instead of your, 797 approval date. So make sure to have that original approval notice with you. Make sure to show it at the port of entry. Make sure they enter the right date on there, and make sure once you enter the U.S., you go online, check your I-94, make sure the date is correct, because we have seen people fall out of status because they're not paying attention to that.
Yeah, I think that's very key. And so I know that we've continually had this question come up since COVID happened and since quarantine did, but what happens, Allison, I know you're kind of our resident expert on this, but what happens if you get stuck out of the US as a green card holder?
Document your efforts to return. Specifically, if you've been outside for more than 6 months, contact the U.S. Embassy in the country where you are. There were, especially, I mean, this was earlier on in COVID, when most countries were shut down to international travel. There were chartered repatriation flights to help U.S. citizens and green card holders get back to the United States. But you need to do everything that you need to do to preserve your status, to show that you're not abandoning, that it's truthfully because of COVID and your lack of ability to return, you know, that you want to keep your residency status and all that. So the more documented efforts that you make to kind of keep record of all of that, keep record of your contacts, whether you're sending emails or making phone calls to the embassy, just do all of that so that when it is safe to come, when you can come back, you can demonstrate to the government, well, I never intended this to happen. I was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
From a government standpoint, though, do you think, they're going to be fairly lenient on this? We've seen them be that way, right?
I mean, I would hope so. I think the bigger, I've done a couple of Facebook videos on this and written on this. In the Trump administration, you just can't guess. The line of discretion and flexibility had kind of been erased for a couple of years. I think now that we have Biden being inaugurated in January, who is someone who's already taken a lot of seriousness about COVID precautions and this, and I'm hoping that we'll get a lot more transparency from these agencies in terms of, a standard policy. If you were stuck abroad between this window of time because of COVID, don't worry about your get back when you can. Don't worry about it. I think that would help a lot of people feel more comfortable, but we don't have that information from the government yet. So in the meantime, just document everything to protect yourself if you need to use it. But right, I would agree with you, Murali. I would hope that COVID is a great excuse, right, as to why people are in this situation, but I'm not going to take maybe that kind of reasonable idea until it's communicated by the government. I'm not going to, take that for granted.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's absolutely fair.
I think it's a really good point. So that's really just the basics we wanted people to know about traveling internationally in the upcoming months, because this is really when a lot of people like to travel. So Murali and Allison, is there anything else you'd kind of like to leave off with for those who just tips maybe, or just any like word of advice for those who may be traveling internationally in the next month or two?
Yeah, at least from, the employment side, I would say that we get lots of questions every single day from clients who want to travel, whether it's India, here, there, everywhere else, and in Canada as well. I mean, Canada, they do have 14-day quarantine, quarantine requirements in Canada. And I would say even with that, folks who are on TN status, don't do it unless you absolutely have to do it. But we do have TN folks who are in valid TN status who are traveling as long as they're willing to do that 14 days in Canada, in their home, etc., who are able to come back, so it's not something that we can say completely don't do it when it comes to Canada, for example, and you're on valid TN status. We have seen US citizens, who are traveling to Canada for emergency purposes being turned around at the port of entry.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. That shouldn't happen because these are real emergencies that we've seen, but that has happened, not to say it happens all the time. With India, again, the flights are there, back and forth at this point. It wasn't that way, 2-3 months ago or whatever, but just make sure that you have a valid visa stamp if you're going to travel. If you don't have a valid visa stamp, avoid it. Unless it's an absolute emergency and you are willing to stay in India for a while, until you get that visa appointment and get that visa done. Because just because you have the appointment doesn't mean that you're going to get the visa like the next day. You might get a 221G administrative processing. A lot of things can happen. Delays can happen. I mean, the whole situation is basically a mess. And that's kind of how we look at it. And it is that way, As Allison pointed out, look at each country's, travel policies. There are a lot of travel bans around the world, and some countries have them and some countries don't. And some countries have no travel ban, but they have other requirements such as you have to take a COVID test 72 hours before you leave the US, come there, quarantine for 14 days, and then take another COVID test before you're allowed to do anything else, you know? And so my advice is talk to your attorney if you have to travel, and then listen to your attorney. That's about it. Allison?
Yeah, please listen to us. We do have your best interests at heart. We don't want to deal with clients calling every week because they're stuck in their home country for 6 months because their visa appointment keeps getting canceled. But really, just to reiterate what Murali was saying, be patient, be flexible. You know, COVID has been for 9 months now, we've been dealing with this, but it's not over just because we're all over it. It's ultimately going to be a year, maybe a little more of our lives. Everyone is sacrificing. This is affecting everyone in the country, in the world, not just immigrants that need visa stamping or have a need to travel. So if a true emergency does arise, give us a call. We can talk about it. We can go through risks and benefits and possible consequences, but just remember, this is going to be a year of our lives, if not a little bit more, and we're all doing the best we can. So I personally, taking the precautions of COVID that I'm taking, would advise against any plane travel unless it's a true life or death situation.
But she does not advise against spaceship travel.
I don't know. Go to space. It's like empty. It's empty up here, guys. It's beautiful.
Quiet. We haven't been isolated enough.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Social distancing, you know, pretty easy.
Right.
Well, thank you both so much. And to our clients and friends of the firm, have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a very enjoyable long weekend.
Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.